The last thing you want to do is work hard all season long trying to get yourself a fantasy championship, and then you get too cute in week 16 and blow it. This is just the time of year where we start the top studs and ride or die with them. But not every fantasy team right now has a Josh Allen, a Jalen Hurts, or a Brock Purdy. Sometimes we're stuck starting the likes of Joe Flacco, Jake Browning, or Baker Mayfield. But is that a bad thing? What is going on, Headliner Nation? Hopefully everyone's doing well out there today. We're talking about the quarterbacks so we can start and sit here in fantasy football week 16. The fantasy playoffs continue, but we're going to go about it maybe a little bit differently here today. We're trying to simplify the process some. The fantasy playoffs are not the time of year to go out there and take big gambles or make bold calls in your lineup. Start your studs. But you also want to try to start the guys that have the most to play for, the teams that are fighting for those playoff chances. Now, before we get into all the quarterbacks here this week, give me one quick second to give a shout out to our sponsor of today's show. It's Waterboy. Now, if you've watched this show here for multiple weeks now, you know that we found Waterboy this year, and this is probably one of the best products we've ever had, hands down, on this show. It has 0 sugar, 0 caffeine, only 10 calories, and 3 times the electrolytes as their main competitor. It's something that can help rehydrate you, get rid of nausea, calm your anxiety a little bit, and give you a boost of vitamins that can help knock out fatigue. Waterboy is definitely something you gotta try out. It's intended to help you recover and replenish the next morning. All it takes is 1 packet. You dump this in, people dump packets like this in their water all the time. Mix it in like 32 ounces of cold water, give it a little shake and stir, and you are ready to go. But I would not be telling you about this if you had to go out and pay full price for it. No. I want you to get it at a discount. So head over to waterboy.com/headliners and then find yourself getting 15% off your order. Now, if you make it to the end of this video and you're like, what was that website he said again? Don't worry, it's down below in the description, waterboy.com/headliners for 15% off your order. Trust me, a lot of people out there, I've been seeing the comments come in, not only on Discord, but in YouTube comments as well. A lot of people enjoying themselves some Waterboy. Okay, then let's go ahead and talk about some quarterbacks. I know that's why you clicked on the video in the first place, but like I said, we're doing things a little bit different here this week. So Taylor, throw me all the quarterbacks up on the screen. Perfect. So here you have all of the starting quarterbacks in week 16 at this time. Sure, there's a couple guys who are questionable, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. But I don't need to sit here and tell you to start some of these guys in your fantasy football playoffs. You already know it. So let's just simplify it some. I'm highlighting the 10 must-start guys in green first. If you have one of them, more than likely you're going to be starting them here in your fantasy playoffs. Guys like Josh Allen, the overall quarterback one, I think you know to start Josh Allen. Guys like Jared Goff, he's had multiple touchdown passes in 5 of his last 6 games played. Just saw him throw for 5 tutties last week, and the Lions need to keep winning ball games. Kyler Murray, we know he has that rushing upside, and it may not be pretty on Sundays, but he continues to go out there and score fantasy points now in a better matchup this week than last week, going up against Chicago. How about Justin Fields, his opponent in that game? A lot of the same can be said for Justin Fields, but now he gets a matchup going up against Arizona, who allows over 19 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Dak Prescott, sure, last week was bad, and every time Dak struggles, people jump on the hater bandwagon. But this guy is the overall quarterback 3 in fantasy football on the season and has scored 17 plus fantasy points in 7 of the last 9 games he's played. Maybe a potential shootout against Miami. How about Tua, his opponent in that game? Sure, he may be on the lower end of this group, but with the possibility of Tyreek Hill coming back and the Dolphins can't stop winning ball games, Tua, a lower end option. How about Patrick Mahomes? He's still a top 10 quarterback. No, he isn't what he was in years past. We all get that, but he's scored at least 17 points now in 3 of his last 5 games played, and has only scored under 14 fantasy points 1 time all year long. How about Jalen Hurts? You know you're going to be starting Jalen Hurts. For the rushing touchdowns alone, make him worth it. But Philadelphia needs to figure some things out, and they need to bounce back after a late loss to Seattle. Lamar Jackson. We're starting Lamar Jackson. We haven't had this opportunity for years because he's typically hurt, but he's playing at a super high level and had almost another 100-yard rushing day in week 15. He's in your lineup along with Brock Purdy. Maybe the freaking MVP candidate, has 10 touchdowns over the last 3 weeks played, one of the best overall offenses in the NFL, and San Francisco is still trying to get that number 1 overall seed. So those ones are easy. How about the ones that are really on the bottom half of the sheet, though? The guys that we're really not considering in the fantasy playoffs just because it's too big of a risk. Let's go ahead and highlight them in red. We got guys like Mason Rudolph. We've seen this story before in Pittsburgh. It's never worked. Why would it now? Not in my fantasy playoffs. Easton Stick. Sure, he got lucky with some big plays in week 15, but this matchup against Buffalo isn't worth the risk in my opinion. Now we have Taylor Heineke in Atlanta. It's not Desmond Ridder. And really the only thing I have to say here to turn people off is Arthur Smith. Do I need to say anything else? How about Bryce Young? He played great in a tough matchup in a heavy rainstorm in week 15, but he can't perform in perfect conditions. He hasn't been fantasy startable all year long. How about Nick Mullins? Not that he played horrible last week, but at times he looked pretty bad. I'm not tempting it against a Detroit team that needs to win this ball game. How about Zach Wilson? A super low ceiling, plus he's currently in the concussion protocol. We already know, though, we're not starting Trevor Siemian. He's not somebody that we're counting on in our fantasy playoffs. Then we got Will Levis. He hasn't had a consistent high ceiling all season long, and now he's dealing with a high ankle sprain. Sure, he wants to play through it, but Tennessee's been eliminated from the playoffs, so do they really push him out there and risk further injury? How about Bailey Zappi, one of the worst overall offenses in the NFL, in a matchup on the road against Denver? Doesn't sound too appetizing. Aiden O'Connell. Last week was the first time all year long that he has scored over 14 fantasy points in a game, and let's be honest, in that game against the Chargers, they were just trying to get Brandon Staley fired, so I'm not reading too much in to Aiden O'Connell. And then Tommy DeVito, yes, this one hurts me slightly, but he really has no consistency, and now he's got to play the Philadelphia Eagles on the road in Philadelphia. Just a little bit too much risk for my liking. So really, that only leaves us these guys in the fringe that we really need to take a closer look at. So let's go ahead and highlight them in yellow. And we're really going to dive into these guys maybe a little bit deeper to try to find some of those Verge guys in case you don't have any of the top studs. And the first one up is Derek Carr, and let me get this straight. He has arguably his best game of the year, and he did it without Chris Olave. The problem with Derek Carr is consistency, though. Last week was the first time since week 8 he's scored over 16 fantasy points, and he hasn't even thrown a touchdown on the road since the week of Halloween. Santa comes next week, y'all. It's been a long time since he's seen a road tutty. Now he gets a matchup going up against the Rams. They allow the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks at 19.1 fantasy points per game. But the two biggest injuries we're monitoring here right now in New Orleans are Chris Olave and offensive tackle Ryan Ramczyk, both currently questionable to play. If this game was at home, maybe I consider it just a little bit more. But out of the guys in yellow, he's not one that I'm really wanting to rely upon here in week 16. There's too much up and down, too many peaks and valleys with Derek Carr. You never really know what you're going to get. How about Matthew Stafford? Now, on the other hand, I do like myself some Matthew Stafford this week, and I do believe he could be one of those guys I consider if I don't have one of those top 10 guys in green. He's been on a tear lately. 12 passing touchdowns over his last 4 games played, and not all of them were some cream puff easy matchups. He's played the likes of Cleveland and Baltimore. If he can do it against them, he can do it here. We just need to remember this isn't all about just Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Kyron Williams has definitely opened up this offense, and the way he's running the ball successfully is what's opening up this passing game. Guys like Demarcus Robinson are getting great looks each and every week, and the tight ends in this offense continue to move the chains and keep drives going. Now a matchup going up against New Orleans. They allow only 14.9 fantasy points per game. That is 7th fewest. But like I said, having past matchups against the likes of Baltimore and Cleveland, in which both those games he scored over 23 fantasy points, this doesn't scare me away from New Orleans. Now, it is worth noting that there are 2 offensive linemen that are questionable to play in this game that we're paying attention to. We have Rob Havenstein and Joe Noteboom, one of the best names out there. They're both questionable to play here in week 16, so pay attention to that. But with the way this offense is looking right now, and the fact that this is still a must-win game for the Rams, they're trying to sneak into the playoffs, plus it's at home in LA. I have no issues with Stafford being an option for you this week if needed. Then we have Jake Browning. The legend continues for this young kid. 3 straight wins for Browning, and over his last 3 starts, he's had at least 275 yards passing in each game and has 7 total touchdowns. Now he gets to travel to Pittsburgh, though, a team that he just played 4 weeks ago in his very first ever NFL start, a game in which he lost. The last loss for the Cincinnati Bengals, but a lot has changed since then. The confidence level, the decision making over the last 3 weeks makes him look like a seasoned vet, but there are some concerns here in this matchup. Going on the road to Pittsburgh isn't ideal. They allow 15.5 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That is 11th fewest in the league, but we did just see Gardner Minshew put up 3 passing touchdowns against this defense last week, and none of them went to Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, or Alec Pierce. But the biggest issue here is not going to be having Jamar Chase. He's going to miss at least this week, maybe more. And anytime you lose your number 1 overall wide receiver, that is a huge loss. But we know he still has plenty of weapons in this offense, right? We got Tyler Boyd, we got T. Higgins, we got Joe Mixon, we have multiple tight ends. Chase Brown has been a big playmaker out of the backfield, but not having Jamar Chase is definitely going to limit his ceiling some. When my rankings come out a little bit later in the week, I really look at Jake Browning as a mid to high end quarterback too, somebody who's going to be in that range of quarterback 14 to 18 or so. But then we also have Gardner Minshew, and had you told me last week that Gardner Minshew was only going to throw the ball 28 times, Trey Sermon was going to lead the backfield in touches, and that Michael Pittman would have left the game early with a concussion, I would have expected a nightmare game for Gardner Minshew. When in reality, it was his second best fantasy day of the season. Talk about a 2023 WTF moment. But it's not like he's been out there playing bad all year. He's just been more of a safer 15 fantasy point a game type guy with limited touchdown upside. Now he gets a matchup going up against Atlanta. They allow 17.1 fantasy points per game, 13th most in the league, and Bryce Young actually looked pretty decent against this defense in bad weather last week. But we do have some injuries to pay attention to. Michael Pittman still in concussion protocol after that brutal hit. We got Zach Moss and offensive tackle Braden Smith also questionable to play. Definite names to pay attention to. But these are must-win games for Indianapolis. They're fighting to get into the playoffs. I wouldn't consider Gardner Minshew if he doesn't have Michael Pittman, though, if I'm being completely honest. In my opinion, just another one of those mid-quarterback twos or so for me here this week. Then we get guys like Jordan Love. I hate to even really question Jordan Love for the most part, but Jaden Reed right now is dealing with a toe injury, and that is a huge loss to this offense. I think this is a bigger loss than that of Christian Watson, or Fantasy Bigfoot we're going to continue to call him, because he continues to not play and continues to remain on the injury report as well. But now they get a game on the road going up against Carolina, and they allow the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks of any other team in this league. It's like the only thing that Carolina does good. And sure, Carolina is eliminated from the playoffs. They have nothing to play for. But can we be honest here? They've been unofficially eliminated for like the last 2 months, and they continue to go out there and play good defense. I'm really hoping that at least he has Jaden Reed out there here this week. If not, look for a whole lot more Dontavian Wicks and maybe a little bit more Romeo Doubs. Another one of these guys, though, that is really a high-end quarterback too, if all of his weapons are playing. How about Joe Flacco? The start looked a little bit rough for Joe Flacco in week 15, if we're all being completely honest with each other. We all thought the magic had run out. But then the fourth quarter started in that game. He went full gunslinger mode and led the Browns back to a win over Chicago. In that game, 374 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Now, through the 3 games he's played, 7 passing touchdowns to 5 interceptions. It's pretty standard Joe Flacco if you ask me. But when you throw the ball 44 plus times a game and you still get multiple touchdowns each and every week, you can get away with it in fantasy football. Now a matchup going up against Houston is a pretty good one. They allow 18.4 fantasy points per game. That's 10th most in the NFL. This offense is overall fairly healthy. And at 9-5, they are in the thick of the playoffs, and they cannot afford to start losing games now. I have no issues throwing Joe Flacco in my lineup this week if you're studless in fantasy football. How about CJ Stroud? A lot of people saw CJ Stroud colored in yellow and were like, Jake, what are you talking about? Why is CJ Stroud in yellow? I hear all of you out there. I'm not a CJ Stroud hater. I love CJ Stroud. If you've been here long enough, you know I've been saying for months now that he should have been the number 1 overall pick. I said it before the draft. Well, Technically, at the time of this recording, he is still in the concussion protocol, and Nico Collins is still questionable with a calf injury. I'm sorry, I'm not starting Case Keenum here either if that's the case, but let's not act like if he returns, this is just some easy matchup for CJ Stroud, because it's not. I like that it's a home game, but going up against Cleveland when potentially missing multiple top wide receivers in your offense, I have my concerns. Cleveland allows only 13.8 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That is fourth fewest in the league. For sure, need to monitor all the things going on in Houston with their injury report here remainder of the week. But I will tell you this, the only way that CJ Stroud makes it inside my top 12 quarterbacks here this week is if both him and Nico Collins are a full go prior to the weekend. And really, at that point, he's still a risky top 12 play. I would love to come out here and just say, hey, this is another one of those smash opportunities for CJ Stroud, but it's really just not yet. Then in the next column, we see the likes of Sam Howell in yellow. He's been so good fantasy-wise all year long. Why is he in yellow, right? I really think we saw the reason why just last week. There is a chance that we see a little bit more Jacoby Brissett down the stretch here in 2023. Washington has been eliminated from the playoff picture. They have nothing to play for. Then you add in the fact they're going to be on the road against the Jets, a Jets defense that allows only 13.4 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is second fewest in the league. The risk is just through the roof on this one for Sam Howell. What about Geno Smith? And as of right now, we don't even know if it's going to be Geno Smith or are they going to stick with Drew Lock? If you ask me, personally, I would like to see Drew Lock, but that is my inner fan speaking right now. His post-game interview that we saw this past week, maybe one of the best I've ever seen, and I'm rooting for him to get another chance. But this is just another one of those situations where Seattle is in a must-win game. What if Drew Lock starts off and he starts off slow? I can see them pulling him for Geno Smith, vice versa as well. Maybe they give the nod back to Geno. Geno struggles early and they're like, listen, let's go back to Lock and try to ride the hot hand. That right there is a huge, huge risk for fantasy football. Now, matchup-wise, it isn't horrible. The Titans allow 15.6 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but overall for the season, the quarterbacks in Seattle haven't had an overly high ceiling. It's nothing compared to what we saw in 2022. And I don't think there's a way to really look at either one of these guys and say, you know what, these guys are going to play 100% of the snaps here this week. In my opinion, they're more of a low-end QB2 option here in week 16. How about Trevor Lawrence? Now, this should be just an absolute smash start for Trevor Lawrence going up against Tampa Bay, but his decision-making as of late hasn't been great. He's losing weapons, and he's not 100% healthy. He's currently in the concussion protocol and questionable to play once again here this week. But Tampa Bay is way easier to throw on than they are to run on. But with the chance now that he doesn't have Zay Jones, that's going to leave him the likes at the wide receiver position of Calvin Ridley, Jamal Agnew, Parker Washington. I mean, is that enough to really be confident in to rank the guy inside the top 12? I mean, the matchup is great. Tampa Bay allows over 19 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. But with the turnovers, the limited weapons, it's a road game, and him being in the concussion protocol, I see Trevor Lawrence being just outside the top 12, more as a high-end quarterback 2 option here this week. How about his opponent in that game, Baker Mayfield? Look at the Bake show that we saw just last week. 381 yards, 4 tutties, no interceptions against Green Bay in Lambeau. By far his best game of the year. And now he gets another great matchup this week going up against Jacksonville, who is way easier to throw on than run on. Not to mention, Baker's been fairly consistent here as of late. In 6 of his last 8 games played, he's had multiple touchdowns. The 2 games in which he didn't came against Carolina and San Francisco, 2 of the better teams against opposing quarterbacks. Going against Jacksonville, though, they allow 20 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. The offense remains healthy in Tampa Bay, and with him actually starting to utilize Chris Godwin a little bit more, his ceiling has come up here over the last month of the season. I have no issue starting Baker Mayfield here this week, and he's going to be a Verge top 12 quarterback in my rankings. Which then only leaves us Russell Wilson, and Russ continues to cook. Now, no, this isn't some high-end steakhouse type of cooking. This is more like Olive Garden range, right? It's consistent. You know what you're going to get. It's not overly extravagant. It's just solid every time. And he's only scored under 16.5 fantasy points one time over the last 8 weeks of the season. And it's really the rushing touchdown upside that's helping him. Rushing touchdowns in 3 of his last 4 games played definitely help bring that floor up each and every week. And it's not like that's some fluke. We've seen Russ run a little bit more here in 2023. But now he gets a matchup going up against New England. They allow 14.8 fantasy points per game. That is 6th fewest in the NFL. Given the matchup and the overall lower ceiling, I can really see Russ hovering right around 15 to 18 fantasy points here in week 16. That's going to make him a higher end quarterback 2 option if needed, but not somebody that's going to make it up inside my top 12. All right, that's going to do it for my quarterback start and sit video here for week 16. We still covered all 32 guys, but we did it in a much faster way. If you enjoyed this type of format, let me know down below in the comment section. I would love to adopt some form of this for next season. It's a great way to consume a lot of content without having to spend a lot of time doing it. So be sure to leave that comment down below because I would love to hear your opinion. Now, before I get out of here for the day, I do want to take a quick second to wish you and yours a Merry Christmas. I know we got a lot more videos coming out, but maybe this is the only one you can catch this week. I just wanted to have an opportunity to tell you Merry Christmas. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of here for the day. Hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and then most importantly, do your part to make the world a better place.